The best of downtown from 7 to 8 a.m. on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket and 929theticket.com. This is the best of downtown.
Welcome into Sunday morning Best of Downtown on the 6th of July. Hope you're having a terrific 4th of July weekend. Rich Kimball and Brian Stackpole with you on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Worldwide, 929theticket.com. You can follow our program on Twitter at Downtown Rich K. And, of course, the Facebook page, Downtown with Rich Kimball. On the show today, a special edition of the Best of Downtown. We thought in honor of Independence Day, we would do a history-themed show for you today. So we've got some terrific guests from a wide variety of areas, but all with some connection to history, including a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Author Gerald Posner, who's written perhaps the most definitive book on the Kennedy assassination, debunking several of the conspiracy theories. He joined us around the time of the 50th anniversary last fall. Plus, we've got two distinguished former United States senators from the state of Maine, William Cohen and George Mitchell. And we've got NASA's chief historian, Bill Barry, talking about the history of the space program as well. All on today's Best of Downtown program. We kick things off with our second visit to downtown from the Pulitzer Prize winner, Doris Kearns Goodwin, who talked with us recently about her book on Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft.
Absolutely. You know, in a democracy, for a leader to be able to reach his countrymen with language that they can understand, and he often said that his Harvard friends would think he talked in too folksy language. He had all these little sayings, speak softly and carry a big stick. He even gave Maxwell House the slogan, good to the very last drop. And the press adored his colorful personality. He was always doing something, whether it was bear hunting or wrestling or boxing. But more importantly, as your question suggests, as a writer himself, he respected other writers, and he knew that he had to treat them with respect, even when they criticized him, not to cut them off, but rather to accept their criticism and even learn from it sometimes, just as they had to accept his criticism when he felt they were going too far in what they were saying. My favorite story of that is after a review was written of one of the books he wrote about the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War, a memoir, and one of the journalists wrote that he was so at the center of everything in his book, he might have called it Alone in Cuba. And he then wrote back to the journalist, said, I regret to tell you my family and friends adored your book, and your book review, rather. Now you owe me one. You have to come visit me. I've long wanted to see you. So it's that give and take that makes it so unusual for a president and a press to have the kind of remarkable relationships they did.
Well, he was able to find partners in his reform efforts as a progressive with people like Ida Tarbell, Ray Stannard Baker, Lincoln Steffens, William Allen White, and the people at McClure's who embraced the term muckraker as a badge of honor, really.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't know that much about them, and uncovering this group of people who were such comrades and such close friends and emotionally related to one another in that one magazine of McClure's was a real discovery for me. And, you know, historians have said, and I've seen it in secondary works, you know, that they really had a huge impact on that era. But when I studied them all individually and saw the impact that Ida Tarbell's work on Standard Oil had with breaking up Standard Oil, Ray Baker's stuff on the railroad abuses had to do with railroad regulation, Lincoln Steffens' material on the corruption of cities brought in new mayors and toppled old bosses. It was really thrilling to uncover this cast of characters, because what happens for me when I spend so much time is I really begin to feel like I know these people, and their writings were so good, and they were such full-bodied creatures that to have lived with them over this period of time became a real treasure.
Well, the fascinating story here is the relationship, one of many fascinating stories, but the relationship between Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, who comes across as such a sympathetic character in the book, someone who was clearly not as comfortable with the press and the trappings of the job, talked about the fact that he would much have preferred perhaps to be on the Supreme Court as he was later in life, and approached the whole progressive movement in a much more methodical fashion, and one that Roosevelt was not happy with when he came back, and fascinating to watch the changes in their relationship.
You know, it's true. I mean, when I started the book, I knew, of course, that he had run for the presidency with Teddy's blessing in 1908, and that they had ended up breaking and running against each other in 1912. But I knew very little about the depth of the friendship that preceded those two events. And they had started becoming friends when they were in their early 30s, had written 400 letters to one another, had backed one another when they were young men. They were both young reformers in an age before the progressive movement in a certain sense. So it made the rupture when it came much more heartbreaking, much more touching to me, really, than it would have been before, because I knew them both. And I really had much more empathy for Taft than I thought I would at the beginning. He was a decent man. He had loyalty. He was amiable. People loved him. He just did not have, as your question suggested, that ability to know how to deal with the press and be a public leader, and he fell short in that dimension. It was much more complicated than simply that he was more conservative than Teddy Roosevelt, because I'm not sure at that time that was as true as we later thought it would be.
We're talking with Doris Kearns Goodwin, the author of The Bully Pulpit, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and the Golden Age of Journalism. Are there some parallels between that battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party a century ago and what's going on today?
Yeah, it certainly seems so. I mean, when I started the book so many years ago, it wasn't as much of an echo as it seems to be now. But obviously what was going on in 1912 was there was this big split in the Republican Party, not simply when Roosevelt ran, but it had been building over several years. In that case, it was a split between the conservatives, who were the majority of the party, and a progressive wing on the left that was wanting to move the country forward in ways of social justice and economic opportunity more than the conservatives. But they began to be really angry with one another, calling each other names. It ends up at the Republican convention with them shouting thief and liar at one another. And, of course, when the two wings run against each other in Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, they divide the Republican vote, and Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, wins. So, you've always got dissensions in parties, but what you're seeing now between the Tea Party and the mainstream Republicans are that same kind of angry vitriol that we saw in 1912, and a real willingness to publicly air their divisions, which often doesn't happen, and maybe the potential of a split in that party, which will be a cautionary tale, I think, to the Republicans if it happens. From 1912, it didn't end up well for them.
Well, as someone who teaches history when I'm not on the radio, I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I did not know one of the most interesting characters in the book until I read the book, and that's Captain Archie Butt. What a fascinating guy.
Oh, I think I sort of fell a little in love with Archie Butt. And thank God for history that he kept these letters that he wrote to his mother first and his sister-in-law over the period of time when he served as military aide to both Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. He had been a journalist before he became a military person, had a wonderful writing skill, loved gossip, loved telling what was going on, and really got close enough to both men that he could record for history how they felt about each other, what this break meant, especially to William Howard Taft. And then at a certain point, what so saddened me was that he was so caught between the love of both men when Theodore Roosevelt announced that he was going to run against Taft, that he just needed to rest and take a vacation, and Taft encouraged him to go. And then at the last minute, he decided, I can't leave Taft in the midst of all this fighting. But Taft said, you have to go, rest, and come home, and you'll be with me. And he went to Europe, and he came home on the Titanic, and of course lost his life. And when he died, I really felt it as a personal sting because I felt so close to him because his writing was so extraordinary.
That's Doris Kearns Goodwin talking about her book, The Bully Pulpit, that came out earlier this year. Coming up next on a Sunday morning Best of Downtown, we revisit the Kennedy assassination with expert Gerald Posner. It's next, Downtown on 92.9 The Ticket. It's the Best of Downtown on your Sunday morning Independence Day weekend, and a special history-themed Best of Downtown this morning. Last November, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Talked about it quite a bit on the show and had the pleasure of chatting with one of the nation's leading experts on the Kennedy assassination. Gerald Posner wrote the book Case Closed, maybe the best indictment of some of the more famous conspiracy theories through the years, and he joined us on Downtown to talk on the 50th anniversary of the killing of the American president.
Well, I think it does in part because of the Kennedys themselves. There's a certain mystique to the Kennedys that carries over with this assassination even in death. If this was 50 years after the assassination of Gerald Ford or Jimmy Carter, as terrible and traumatic as that would be for the country, I'm not sure if the country would be quite as obsessed as they have been with the riddle of this case over a period of time.
You've often said, and you've written, that people, when they talk about the various conspiracy theories, leave something important out of the conversation, and that thing they have left out often is Lee Harvey Oswald. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think that Oswald is absolutely the key to understanding the case. You know, people tend to look at the assassination and they think it's about ballistics and bullet angles and what happened at Dealey Plaza and what's happening in terms of going ahead and looking at the Zapruder film. All of those things are very important, obviously, but if you really want to know why Jack Kennedy died in Dallas 50 years ago tomorrow, it's understanding the tortured and tumultuous and unsettled life of that 24-year-old sociopath, Lee Harvey Oswald. And only by studying him and getting to understand him can you get a feeling for why Kennedy did die. And in the end, the frustration of it is that it's very much for Oswald's own warped motivations. It's for himself placing him in the history books, thinking that this is throwing a cog in the machinery of government that he so dislikes. And the Oswald that I came to understand could have been on a sixth floor of a building in downtown Moscow shooting at Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier. He wasn't specifically a hatred of Kennedy, but it was sort of a hatred of the systems, both Russian and American.
Well, he tried to kill General Edwin Walker earlier in 1963, and even his family has talked about the path that he was on, frustrated in his jobs, thrown out of the house by his wife, and just everything reaching a perfect storm by November 22nd.
Yeah, you know, I think that you just said a moment ago to some listeners who may not be familiar with the case, they may have, they heard you say he tried to kill Edwin Walker, and Walker's a name that's never even heard of. They've probably heard of Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, and they know the general outlines of the case. They may have heard of something called the magic bullet, but Walker's a name that doesn't come up much, especially by conspiracy theorists, and that's because it's not very convenient to the idea that Oswald was just a patsy. That's because a few months before killing Kennedy, just in April, in the spring of '63, Oswald had committed himself to political assassination, and the person he chose to as I say, make his mark in history was to kill this right-wing former general who had run for the governor's position in Texas and hadn't won the year before and was still a force in politics. And he failed to kill Walker. He shot up. He thought he had killed him, but the bullet was deflected by a window frame. And this young guy was then 23, turns 24 before he kills Kennedy, who's looking to make his mark in history and is turned down when he tries to get to Cuba. He wants to join the revolution over there. Lands a job when he comes back to Dallas, just 6 weeks before the assassination of the book depository, this building in downtown Dallas, and learns only a few days before the assassination that the president's motorcade is coming in front of the place he works at. I have to tell you, it has to be a lightning bolt that hits him. Here he is, Richard, thinking that he's going to make his mark in history by killing Edwin Walker and either getting killed for that or going to jail for the rest of his life, and suddenly he can kill the president of the United States and be remembered. And he is. We're talking about him 50 years later. Oswald would be ecstatic.
We're talking with author Gerald Posner, Case Closed, his tremendous book that really takes care of most of the major conspiracy theories and exhaustive work, and you've continued to follow up through the years. As you looked at all of the various theories, was there one that was perhaps more credible than the others?
Well, for me, the most credible theory has to be the smallest theory. What I mean by that is that the best chance of a conspiracy working is when it's what I call a kitchen conspiracy. Just a few people, 2, 3 know about it. That's it. Carlos Marcello had been the Don, the mafia godfather of New Orleans, and I'm going to paraphrase him here. I'm not very good at quoting Marcello, but he said once that conspiracy is 2 or more people, and it stays a secret if only one of them is alive. That's pretty much true. And so when you get to the conspiracies, supposedly where the CIA and the FBI were involved, and they did surgery on the president's head to make it look as he was shot in one direction, they altered the Zapruder film and they altered the autopsy photos, and you've got dozens or hundreds of people involved. That's just not how conspiracies work and then stay secret for 50 years. So I looked at 2 in particular to see if the mafia may have been involved, because Jack Ruby's murder of Oswald on Sunday, he's a nightclub owner, he was a wannabe mobster. Could there be ties to the mafia? And if they're silencing Oswald, then clearly Oswald knows something they don't want out. I looked at that very hard. And the other is Cuba, because Oswald had wanted to get to Castro, join the revolution. He had been at the Cuban mission just in late September. They had turned him down to go over to Havana. And the question was whether he may have been prompted, not really in a conspiracy in which they said, we'll pay you money, Lee, or do this for us, but in which they may have felt he was somewhat unstable, they knew he was a little bit violent, and they may have encouraged him to take a reckless act to strike a blow for the revolution, and that may have put him in the sixth floor of the depository. But I could find no evidence to support that.
Gerald Posner, author of the book Case Closed, who joined us on Downtown last November. It's a special history edition of the Best of Downtown on this Sunday morning. When we come back, former United States Senator and Defense Secretary and member of the Maine Sports Hall of Fame, William S. Cohen, joins us next. It's Downtown on 92.9 The Ticket. Sunday morning, July 6th, Best of Downtown, a previously recorded edition of the program. And for this 4th of July weekend, a history edition. We talk about a journey. Bill Cohen made his way from Hancock Street in Bangor all the way to the highest levels of American government, United States Senator, Secretary of Defense under Bill Cohen. And then last year, inducted into the Maine Sports Hall of Fame. We had a wide-ranging discussion with the former senator, talking about his youth in Bangor, growing up as a basketball player and a young man, and what took him all the way to the halls of power in Washington.
It was a great afternoon, and frankly, I was surprised to see something like 600 or 700 people give up a beautiful, beautiful Sunday afternoon to sit through a ceremony that lasted about 3.5 hours. It was a long afternoon. There were 5 student athlete scholars, and they were recognized, and they got $5,000 scholarships, beautiful young people. And I noted that out of the 5 scholar athletes, 4 of them were women. And out of the 10 honorees for the Hall of Fame, 9 were men. So there has been a reversal, it seems to be, in terms of the young people coming up who are students and the role that women now play and are allowed to play through Title IX. And it's just it was great to see. And the afternoon was just studded with great stories from people who've had a wide variety of experiences throughout the sporting world, from being a medical sports doctor to a racing car driver to a coach of field hockey and basketball, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful day.
Well, you talked about how much athletics has meant in your life, how it helped provide some of the building blocks for your future success. People like Red Berry, the coaches that you had as a young man growing up. I think you talked about John Coombs at the Bangor Y, which a lot of us could identify with, and how much those influences mean on young people and their future success.
Well, they're absolutely essential. If you look at sports as being a metaphor for the rest of your life, you have to engage in strict discipline. You have to practice. You have to prepare day after day. And I can recall living on. I was born on Hancock Street, but I moved about when I was 8 years old up to East Summer Street, and down the end of the street was Chicky O'Leary's home, his mother and father's home, and he had a backboard out there and a light. And during the middle of the winter, I would go out when there was snow on the ground, you couldn't bounce the ball, and I would shoot for hours until my ears were aching and my nose was running and I was crying from the cold. And I kept shooting and shooting and shooting because I knew that it was going to take that kind of discipline to be a good shooter. And I think that's what's involved in every facet of our lives, from practicing, preparing, whether you're preparing as a teacher, whether you're preparing as a lawyer for a case, whether you're preparing as a congressman or a senator or as a Secretary of Defense. In any capacity that I have served, it was always the discipline, the sacrifice, the preparation, the fact that there were rules that I had to follow, the fact that there were regulators or referees who would see whether I obeyed those rules, or teachers who would test me. It's all of those things are involved in any sport, any athletic endeavor. And I think that's the lesson that comes out of engaging in this sort of activity is preparation and discipline, whether it's the mind for chess, whether it's any aspect of whatever we engage in. It requires all of those aspects of having a vision, discipline to get there, preparation, execution, and compliance with the rules, and being held accountable. All of that is involved in sports.
As a basketball player at Bangor High School, I'm sure you had some wonderful memories of the old Bangor Auditorium. What were your thoughts on the last tournament and then the new Cross Center coming to town?
Well, it goes back a long way, but my dad used to sneak me into the basketball games in Bangor High when I was a little boy, and they were always sold out. And he would sneak me in the inside of his coat. He had a big top coat. He would wrap me up in the top coat, sneak me in, and then when he'd get up in the balcony, he'd put me on his knee, and we'd watch the game together. And I would see players that I knew from Hancock Street. Johnny Norris was a 6'6" giant in those days. He was the tallest man, certainly in the city. And he was my neighbor. Don Pelkey was a great guard who was across the street from me. Bobby Nelson, I never got to meet until later in life, was another guard, Walter Lurrow. And I saw these players in the old Bangor Auditorium, and I prepared, and we always practiced there. When I was in high school, we had moved. With the moment I moved into Bangor High School, they had built a new gym, new auditorium. And so we used to use the old auditorium as our practice gym. And I must say it was an entirely different experience than shooting in the old gym, which was very small and confined, and then going into the new auditorium, which was, huge and vacuous. The seats went on forever in both sides. And you have an entirely different sensation of playing on a floor like that, which is, sort of like Boston Gardens. And I played once in the Boston Gardens, a couple times, actually. And you have ice under the floor. And you have a totally different feel for it. But I must say that those were some of the biggest moments of my life. And my parents always sat. They had season seats, tickets, and they sat in the same place every game. And it was a joy to see them up in the stands and know that I was going to do my best that night if I could.
We're talking with Secretary William Cohen. You've had a remarkable career in politics, as a poet, as an author, and you did all that with a public education. Now, public education is under assault in a lot of quarters these days. What do we need to do to make an educational system better serve our young people?
Well, we have to insist on a number of things. We have to insist on good teachers. Teachers play, other than our parents, teachers are the most crucial people in our lives because we spend more time with teachers than we do at home. If you think about our parents are working, they may have night jobs. During the day from 8 o'clock until 3 o'clock or later in the afternoon if there are extracurricular activities. So you think about the hours that you spend in the classroom or in the school environment, and then you come home and you have dinner and then you study. You may sneak in some television from time to time, but you think about the role that teachers play in our lives, and they are the ones that we look to for guidance, in addition, obviously, to our parents and to churches and synagogues. But our teachers are key. So having good teachers is fundamental. Having good food and available to everybody is also fundamental. And this is one of the problems I think I speak out more on in these later years of my life, that when I see that we have an epidemic in this country, it's called obesity. And it's very, very discouraging to see how we are allowing ourselves, how we are abusing ourselves, and we're eating the wrong food and too much of it and too little exercise. And this body of ours, it's a miraculous machine. It will last 80 or 90 years without an oil change. There's no other machine that does that. And so you think about it, what we're doing to ourselves, whether it's smoking or drinking or eating too much and not exercising enough, we're putting into our healthcare system burdens which we'll never be able to afford to pay for. So I look at the athletics being critical in terms of having activity. I look at the food that we eat, and the food that's made available for students is also being critical. Having a good curricula in terms of the study habits that have to be developed, and then having a sense of competition. And what I have tried to impart to students, and I had a wonderful chance to speak to the middle school, the William S. Cohen Middle School, to talk about the world today. We are in competition because the world, although we know it's round, is also flat. And technology has flattened the world in the sense that now information is not simply the prize of the elite, or the wealthy. Information is now in the hands of anybody who's got one of these smartphones or a computer or an iPad. And globally, we have 6.5, 7 billion people who now have really entered the world of ideas and of knowledge and information. So the competition is that much more severe. That means we have to discipline ourselves and try harder that much more. And so we've got to get ready to compete. And so this sense of competition and also having a sense of joy about the eagerness to compete and match wits and match physical capabilities, all of that will prepare us for a life in whether it's business or whether it's in academia, whether it's in law or politics or virtually any aspect of our lives. That sense of competition is the lifeblood of our free system, our freedom system.
Former Senator William Cohen visited with us here on Downtown right before he went into the Maine Sports Hall of Fame. When we come back on the show, we're going into space and talk about the history of the manned space program with NASA's chief historian, Bill Barry. That's next on the Best of Downtown here on 92.9 The Ticket. It's the Best of Downtown, 92.9 The Ticket and 929theticket.com. Rich Kimball and Brian Stackpole here with you on this Sunday morning, a history edition of the program. 45 years ago this month, Apollo 11 and its crew set forth for the moon. 2 astronauts, Buzz Aldrin and, of course, Neil Armstrong, set foot on the moon. Michael Collins in the command module circling the moon. We had occasion recently to talk with NASA historian Bill Barry about the history of the manned space program and what the future might hold for the program as well.
Well, I was an 11-year-old boy glued to my TV set, and it was, of course, the landing was late in the afternoon Eastern time, and I got special dispensation to stay up late. I think the actual first step on the moon was around 11 o'clock in the evening Eastern time, and I remember thinking that was awfully late at the time.
Yeah, I'm with you. We're the same age. I was 11. I was telling some of the guys here in the studio before we went on that I watched the landing live, and then my mom actually got me out of bed to make sure I was there to watch Neil Armstrong take that first step down the lunar lander. It's embedded in the minds of all of us who remember that. It was one of those few events in our history where all over the world people were watching the same thing. And so now 43 years have passed. It doesn't seem possible as much time has gone by, and yet it's been, some 40 years since we've had men on the moon.
Yeah, of course, the last trip to the moon was Apollo 17, which was in December 1972, and after that, we haven't gone more than a couple hundred miles above Earth's surface into low Earth orbit. So it's been different for a few years.
You hear a lot of talk from people, of course, about the expense of especially manned space missions, but in actual fact, when you look at what the cost was compared to the overall federal budget, in many ways, it was really a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, in the 60s at the peak, around 64, 65, the NASA budget was something like 3 to 4% of the entire federal budget, which is pretty substantial, but not much. Actually, the level of the budget was going down by the time they landed on the moon. Because the bulk of the work had been actually done earlier. And from the 1970s on, the NASA budget's been about pretty consistently about 0.5% of the budget. Generally, certainly less than 1% of the budget that whole period. And we've done an amazing amount of stuff on that budget, but we haven't been able to get back to the moon on that kind of money. But we've done quite a bit of other things. Flown the space shuttle for 30 years and sent probes all over the place, and had the Hubble Space Telescope up doing all kinds of interesting things. So it's been very, very productive. I think we do pretty good for half a penny on the federal budget dollar.
For people who don't remember, what were some of the things that we learned and we gained from putting man not only on the moon but into space in general, and some of the things that, for instance, robotics aren't able to do for us?
Well, of course, the very fact that we did it at all, I think, is perhaps one of the big factors. A lot of my academic background has been studying international political issues, and And we forget it now, but in the 1960s, particularly in 1961, when President Kennedy challenged us to land on the moon within a decade, people were really afraid that the U.S. system was not up to snuff in terms of competing with the Soviet Union. They had consistently clobbered us in terms of achieving various space first before we did. And so there was a real battle for the hearts and minds of people in the 60s. By the time we landed on the moon 43 years ago today, I think that struggle was less obvious, but nonetheless, that was the concluding step in that process. And the idea that the U.S. and the Soviet Union were going to annihilate each other had declined dramatically by that point, and I think in part because we'd shown that we were competitive. So on a political scale, certainly the Apollo program had a huge effect, one that we don't think much about now because we know what the end game was. In fact, the Soviet Union eventually collapsed, but it had a huge effect. And then there are all sorts of spin-off things that happened. The changes in the computer industry and the development of all kinds of technologies that make a big difference. Memory foam that you may have in your mattress, I certainly do. It was a product of the space program. And breathalyzers, by the way, were also a product of the space program. They're little chromatographs that were designed actually originally for the Viking mission to Mars. And they actually weren't done on time, so they didn't get on the Viking mission that went to Mars. But nonetheless, those little small, tiny gas chromatographs are the key to breathalyzers, which some of us are not so happy that they exist, maybe, but but they're there. So there's the whole spin-off argument, and then there's a lot of scientific knowledge we have now about the university. You look at a textbook that students now have about the origins of the universe, and when they have physics and science classes of various sorts, they're completely different from when you and I were young. So in large part because we've sent people out there to go look at things and bring rocks back from the moon, and they've confirmed various theories we had about the formation of the moon and how our solar system was created and where life comes from.
The chief historian for NASA, Bill Berry, joining us on Downtown, our Best of History edition on this Sunday morning. When we come back, former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell joins us to talk sports and more on Downtown, the Best of. Back on the Best of Downtown on your Sunday morning, 6th of July. Rich Kimball, Brian Stackpole with you, a previously recorded edition of the program for this holiday weekend. Well, just as Bill Cohen's had quite a journey through his career, George Mitchell, much the same, the Waterville native, grew up in the shadow of his more successful athlete brother, Johnny Swish Mitchell. But George done okay for himself as a United States Senator, of course, began his career as a judge, worked closely with Edmund Muskie, has gone on to work on peace treaties around the world, particularly in Northern Ireland. And, of course, investigated Major League Baseball and the use of performance-enhancing drugs with the Mitchell Report as well. We talked with former Senator Mitchell from London earlier this year before his induction into the Maine Sports Hall of Fame.
I never imagined it, not only when I was growing up in Waterville, but ever since. It was a complete surprise when Dick Whitmore called me to tell me about it. As far as the bragging rights goes, my brother's really kind of upset about it because my brother Johnny is in the Sports Hall of Fame, and he thinks that my getting in dilutes the honor, reduces the level of high-ranking athletes that have been admitted in there because I really was not as good an athlete as my brothers. So it'll be a subject of much discussion this weekend.
So despite this, you'll still be Swisher's little brother.
That's right. Always have been, always will be.
Well, just about a year ago at this time, we were talking with former Senator William Cohen, who was also going into the Maine Sports Hall of Fame. And I'll ask you the question I asked him. What was it about being a young athlete and being involved in sports at an early age? What lessons did you learn that served you later on in life?
Sports are an important part of American life, and I think they can be helpful in many ways. One is, of course, that you learn teamwork in most sports, particularly basketball, which is what I played.
nobody can do it by themselves, and you have to learn to work with others. Secondly, you learn that you don't win all the time. Very few teams win every game. So you learn that defeat and failure is a regular part of life, and you have to learn from losing and, stand up and go back and battle again the next time. That's a very valuable lesson. Third is, of course, good health. It's an important part of life for everyone, trying to stay in shape, particularly after you leave school and you don't engage in organized sports like basketball. You have to find ways to keep yourself physically healthy. So I've always felt privileged to have been part of an athletic family. It isn't a joke. It really is true that I wasn't as good as my brothers, and I think, fortunately for me, the Hall of Fame criteria is not solely athletic ability. It's other contributions, and I'm glad I was able to get in on that basis.
Well, you've continued your connection with athletics, being part of the ownership group of the Boston Red Sox, 3 championships, and each unique in their own way. But last year's title had to be very special because of what had happened in 2012 and because of this unique group of young men that were part of that Red Sox team.
It really was. You hit it on the head. Each of the 3 championships was and always will be special. I've been part of the Red Sox management since this group took over the Red Sox about a dozen years ago. I had known John Henry previously. I'd been on the board of the Florida Marlins when he was the owner there. And so when he and the others asked me to join their group, I didn't hesitate, and I've been lucky to have been a participant since then. It's been a great experience. It's a great organization. And last year I can recall that 6th game at Fenway Park. It really was an electric evening, and there was a certain inevitability about their winning. Everybody just kind of knew it was going to happen, and it did, and the way it happened was really a special part of life.
We're talking with Senator George Mitchell here on Downtown, who joins us from London. Your Mitchell report on the use of performance-enhancing drugs in Major League Baseball opened a lot of eyes, and in many ways was the conduit that led us to where we are today. Still some problems in baseball, but I think everyone would agree that Major League Baseball right now has the strongest drug program in all of professional sports. Are you pleased with the progress that's been made?
Yes, I commend both the management and the players for what they've done in recent years. I think you have to keep this in perspective. It's an ongoing problem. We're not going to ever reach a point where nothing bad ever happens. Every state, every country has laws against crime. Nobody expects that crime is going to end just because we have laws to try to punish those who engage in criminal activity or deter future action. It's sort of the same way with drugs in sports. It's been around for most of human history. The financial rewards are so tremendous in professional sports now that the behavior is skewed toward trying to get an edge. And right now, there are people engaged in various parts of the world in the illegal activity of trying to develop new performance-enhancing drugs that can't be detected by current methods. So it's kind of an ongoing problem of management, and I think baseball does deserve great credit for having what is by far the strongest program. And in particular, I think the players have undergone a meaningful and positive transformation in attitude. For many years, the players were opposed to any form of drug testing, and it took a lot of pressure, public pressure, congressional pressure, and others to get them to come around to support it. They didn't cooperate in my investigation, but I think since then you've seen what really is a remarkable transformation, and now they are among the strongest proponents of a tough and effective program. So I think all of them deserve congratulations.
When you first became Senate Majority Leader, you reached out to the opposition party and especially the leadership and said to them, I'll never embarrass you, I'll never criticize you publicly. You were able to reach across the aisle. be successful and find compromise. We've become so polarized right now in Washington. Is there a way to get that professional relationship back and to be able to make some progress in the halls of Congress?
It's pretty difficult in current circumstances. I did, one of the first persons I called was Bob Dole, who was the Republican leader after I became Senate Majority Leader, and we worked out a good relationship, still have a very close personal relationship. To this day, he and I have never had a harsh word passed between us, either publicly or privately, and we were able to work together, although it wasn't easy. You have to keep this in context. Politics in the United States has always been rough and tumble, going way back to the beginnings of time. There's a professor from the University of Maine, Amy Freed, who wrote an article in the Bangor Daily News just a couple of years ago about the presidential campaign of 1800 between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, now both revered figures in our history, and it was really a rough campaign, name-calling and a lot of bad things said about each other. So it's always been rough and tumble, but I think the elements now that have changed it are the power of electronic communications, both radio and particularly television, and the massive amounts of money that are now really awash in the political system. They are having a devastating effect on how you campaign and how you run for office, and the permanent campaign is now feature of American life. You don't just campaign in an election year. You campaign round the clock, round the calendar, every day that you're in office. And it distorts the whole process, makes it very tough, and I think it's going to be difficult to change, frankly, and ultimately will only change if the American people demand it.
Former Senator George Mitchell joining us here on the Best of Downtown, a history edition for your Sunday morning. We'll put the wraps on this one and let you know what's ahead for a very interesting week of downtown. Up next, here on Sports Radio, 92.9 The Ticket.
Feeling better now that we're through. Feeling better 'cause I'm over you.
Getting set to wrap things up here on a Sunday morning Best of Downtown. Hope you enjoyed our history edition of the show and hope you're having a great 4th of July weekend. Tomorrow afternoon, a special edition of Downtown, really so Stack and I can enjoy one more day of our long weekend, but we think it's going to be fun. It's the half year in review. We've taken a look at some of the biggest sports stories and some of our biggest downtown events and guests of the first half of 2014, and you'll hear it all coming up tomorrow afternoon from 4 until 6 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Now, after that, Stack, double duty for us, because beginning on Tuesday, we'll be on twice a day, just for this week, unless it catches on.
Right.
And
really
they pay us a lot of money.
Yeah, really looking forward to it.
Stack, you got to be enthusiastic about
No,
this.
I am. I'm excited to do it because I've never actually done anything in morning radio, so it'll be a nice little treat for me, and it's just a short run, at least for the time being. So.
Now, have you thought about the other possibility? Instead of getting up ridiculously early, have you thought about just staying up all night?
I might do that and just sleep during the middle of the day, though I could miss some stuff. You never know.
There's no question
We'll
about
see.
it.
We'll see how Monday plays out, first and foremost.
So Tuesday morning, we'll be filling in for Dale and Clem on the morning pitch from 6 to 8 a.m., and we'll be doing that from Tuesday through Friday, also doing downtown in the afternoon from 4 until 6. Stack. There is a possibility that Stack could oversleep in the morning. Yeah. There's also a pretty good possibility I could oversleep and miss the afternoon show.
Right. It might just be the morning pitch with Rich Kimball. It might just be downtown with Brian Stackpole.
So we'll roll the dice and find out. Either way, we'll be with you not once but twice on Tuesday. We hope you'll join us both at 6 in the morning and at 4 in the afternoon for downtown. And downtown wrestles the morning pitch to the ground right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Hope the rest of your weekend goes well. Join us for our half year in review tomorrow afternoon at 4 and then twice on Tuesday. Oh, my.
Things will be great when you're downtown. No finer place for sure. Downtown. Everything's waiting for you. Downtown. Don't hang around and let your problems surround you. There are movie shows downtown. Maybe you know some little places to go to where they never close. downtown. Just listen to the rhythm of a gentle bossa nova. You'll be dancing with them too before the night is over. Happy again. The light's so much brighter there. You can forget all your troubles, forget all your cares.